The morning of my daughter Lily's funeral, the sky wept in a way I couldn't. A steady drizzle that turned the cemetery grass into a carpet of dark emerald sorrow, and as I stood there in my black dress that felt too tight around my chest, too suffocating around my throat, I realized that the empty space beside me wasn't just an absence, it was a wound that kept tearing itself open with every condolence whispered in my direction. Every pitying glance cast my way, because John wasn't here. My husband of 12 years wasn't standing next to me as we lowered our only child into the ground, and the reason why made my blood simmer beneath my grief-stricken exterior like lava waiting to erupt. I had received his text just an hour before the service began, a message so casual it felt like a slap across my face. "Important client meeting, I'll call you later." Those words glowing on my phone screen as I sat in the funeral home's preparation room, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the device, and it was the location tag that shattered whatever composure I had left, because the text hadn't come from some corporate boardroom or stuffy conference center. It had pinged from the Seaside Paradise Resort, a 5-star luxury destination I recognized immediately from the glossy brochure that had arrived at our house 3 weeks ago, back when Lily was still breathing, still fighting, still hoping that her father would come home from his business trip to say goodbye. But he never did, and now here I was, burying her alone while he sipped cocktails by an infinity pool. The audacity of it was so staggering that for a moment I forgot to breathe, forgot that I was supposed to be the grieving mother, holding it together for the sake of the handful of family members who had gathered under the funeral tent. My sister Amanda stood to my right, her hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel my bones grinding together, and my mother-in-law Patricia stood just behind me, her sobs the only sound besides the rain and the priest's monotone recitation of prayers I couldn't focus on because all I could think about was John's face in those photos I had found buried in his email account 2 days ago. John laughing with a woman named Vanessa, John kissing Vanessa's cheek on a yacht, John living an entirely separate life, while I held Lily's hand through chemo appointments and midnight seizures and the final agonizing hours when her small body finally gave up the fight. It had been waging for 8 months, 8 months of hell that John had systematically avoided with excuse after excuse. "The company needs me. This deal is crucial. I'll be home soon, I promise." Lies stacked upon a foundation of betrayal so deep I was still discovering new layers of it, and as the casket was lowered into the earth, as the finality of it hit me like a freight train, I made a decision that crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. John thought he could abandon us, thought he could erase his responsibilities and start fresh with his mistress, thought I would simply accept this reality and fade quietly into the background of his new life. But he was wrong, devastatingly wrong, because I wasn't the same woman he had married. Grief had burned away the parts of me that were soft and forgiving, and what remained was something harder, something colder, something capable of making him pay for every lie, every betrayal, every moment he should have been here but wasn't. The reception after the funeral was held at my sister Amanda's house, a modest 2-story colonial that suddenly felt too small for the weight of collective grief pressing down on everyone who had gathered there. Casseroles and condolence cards covered every available surface, and people spoke in hushed tones as if raising their voices might somehow disturb Lily's rest. But I couldn't eat, couldn't engage in small talk, couldn't pretend that everything wasn't unraveling inside me like a spool of thread caught in a machine. I excused myself and slipped upstairs to Amanda's guest room, closing the door behind me and finally allowing myself to collapse onto the bed. My phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline, and that's when I started digging, really digging, through bank statements and credit card records I had downloaded before the funeral. Spreadsheets of our joint finances that told a story I had been too distracted by Lily's illness to notice. Thousands of dollars withdrawn over the past year, all labeled as business expenses, but the receipts told a different tale: 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, designer boutiques, spa treatments, private yacht rentals, every charge a dagger in my chest, every transaction proof that while I was rationing grocery money to pay for Lily's medications, John was living like a king with Vanessa. I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar, the appointments I had attended alone, the nights I had spent in hospital chairs while Lily slept fitfully in her bed, the moments I had begged John to come home, to be present, to be a father, and every single time there was a luxury charge on the credit card I didn't even know existed. Rage bloomed in my chest like a dark flower, its petals unfurling with each new discovery. But rage alone wasn't enough. I needed something more concrete, something that would ensure John couldn't wriggle out of the consequences I was planning. That's when I remembered Eleanor, a private investigator Amanda had used years ago during her own divorce. I found Eleanor's contact information in Amanda's address book. A small card with embossed lettering that promised discretion and results, and I called her right there from the guest room. My voice steadier than I expected as I explained the situation. Eleanor didn't waste time with unnecessary sympathy. She simply asked for the facts: John's full name, his workplace, his known associates, any suspicious activity I had noticed, and by the time I hung up, I had an appointment scheduled for the following morning. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs and murmured condolences. With a smile that felt painted on, my mother-in-law Patricia cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed and accusatory. "Where is my son?" she demanded, her voice sharp despite her tears. "Why isn't John here?" And I could have told her the truth right then, could have exposed his betrayal to his own mother, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the desire to control the narrative, or maybe it was the knowledge that Patricia's suffering would be collateral damage in the war I was about to wage. So instead I said, "He's dealing with an emergency at work, he sends his condolences," and the lie tasted like ash on my tongue, but it bought me time to gather evidence, time to build my case, time to ensure that when I finally struck, the blow would be devastating and complete. Patricia seemed satisfied with the answer, or at least too grief-stricken to press further. And as the last guests filtered out and Amanda began cleaning up, I sat on her porch swing watching the rain continue to fall, thinking about Lily, about her laughter and her bright eyes and the way she used to curl up next to me. I met Eleanor the next morning at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where the coffee was strong and the clientele minded their own business. She was exactly as I remembered from Amanda's description, sharp-eyed and professional, with an air of competence that immediately put me at ease despite the circumstances. I slid into the booth across from her and placed a folder on the table, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it to reveal the evidence I had already collected: bank statements, credit card receipts, screenshots of John's social media posts with Vanessa, emails discussing their plans. Eleanor examined each document with the practiced eye of someone who had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening of her jaw, a flicker of something that might have been sympathy or perhaps simply recognition of a particularly egregious case of betrayal. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her pen poised over a leather-bound notebook. "At least a year," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Maybe longer. I was so focused on Lily's treatment that I didn't notice the signs until it was too late." Eleanor nodded, jotting notes in shorthand I couldn't decipher. "And he wasn't at your daughter's funeral?" "It wasn't really a question, but I answered anyway." "He texted me from a resort. Said he had an important meeting." The words felt ridiculous even as I spoke them, the absurdity of the excuse so glaring it almost made me laugh. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "I'll need access to your joint accounts, his work email if possible, and I'll run a background check on this Vanessa. See what else might be hiding beneath the surface." She paused, meeting my eyes directly. "This won't be easy. Digging into someone's life like this often uncovers things you weren't prepared to find. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about Lily's empty room, her toys still scattered across the floor because I couldn't bear to pack them away yet. I thought about the nights I had spent alone in the hospital, begging John to come home while he was off creating memories with another woman. I thought about the funeral, the empty space beside me, the weight of being abandoned in my darkest hour. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I want to know everything. I want proof that will stand up in court. And I want to make sure he pays for what he's done." Eleanor smiled slightly, not with joy but with the grim satisfaction of someone who understood justice. "Then let's get to work." Over the next week, Eleanor became a constant presence in my life, updating me daily with new findings, each revelation more damning than the last. John hadn't just been spending our money on his affair, he had been systematically embezzling from his own company, creating false invoices, setting up dummy vendors, funneling thousands of dollars into offshore accounts that he and Vanessa planned to use for their new life together. The emails Eleanor uncovered were particularly nauseating, conversations between John and Vanessa discussing their future, how they would move to the coast, start over, leave everything behind. "She won't suspect a thing," John had written in one email. "By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll be long gone." Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly, each sentence a fresh wound. But beneath the pain was something else. Something cold and calculating. John had underestimated me, assumed I would remain passive, broken. too consumed by grief to fight back. He had made the fatal mistake of thinking I was weak, and that miscalculation was going to cost him everything. Eleanor also discovered that Vanessa wasn't John's first affair. The evidence Eleanor compiled over the following days was more than sufficient. It was damning. A complete portrait of a man who had systematically dismantled his life while constructing an elaborate lie. And as I sat in my kitchen reviewing the final report, I felt something shift inside me. The grief that had been consuming me since Lily's death didn't disappear, but it transformed, channeled into something purposeful. Something that gave me a reason to get out of bed each morning. I drafted a carefully worded text message to John, my fingers hovering over the send button for a long moment before I pressed it. I think we need to talk. I know things have been difficult, but I want to try to reconnect. Can you meet me at the lake house this weekend? I watched the screen, waiting for his response, and it came within minutes, too quick, too eager. Of course, I've been wanting to talk too. I'll be there Saturday afternoon. The ease with which he lied, even now, even after everything, was almost impressive in its audacity, but I had learned something important over the past few weeks. I had learned that John was predictable. He thought he was clever, thought his plans were foolproof. But he followed patterns, and patterns could be exploited. The lake house had been my father's before he passed. A rustic cabin nestled in the woods overlooking a pristine body of water. It was the one asset John couldn't touch. The one place that remained entirely mine, and it would be the perfect setting for what I had planned. I spent the days leading up to our meeting preparing, not just emotionally but practically. I installed a small recording device in the main room, hidden within a decorative clock on the mantel. I organized all the evidence into a comprehensive folder, each document tagged and labeled, and I contacted my attorney, Daniel, a sharp-minded lawyer Amanda had recommended. Someone who specialized in cases of financial fraud and marital dissolution. Daniel reviewed everything I had collected, his expression growing increasingly serious as he flipped through page after page. "This is significant," he said finally, setting the folder aside. The embezzlement alone could result in criminal charges, and combined with the evidence of his affair and the financial abuse during your daughter's illness, we have a very strong case for divorce proceedings. He paused, studying my face. "But I need to ask, what do you want out of this? What's your end goal?" I had thought about this question constantly over the past week, lying awake at night staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in my chest. "I want him to lose everything," I said quietly. "His job, his reputation, his freedom if possible. I want him to feel what I felt, the abandonment, the betrayal, the complete destruction of everything he thought was secure." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we need to be strategic. We'll file the divorce papers after you meet with him. But before that, I'll coordinate with the authorities regarding the embezzlement. That way he won't have time to cover his tracks. Or flee." The plan was coming together, each piece falling into place with a precision that would have satisfied my analytical mind if I weren't so consumed by the emotional weight of it all. Amanda offered to come with me to the lake house, to provide moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. A final confrontation between John and me, unmediated and raw. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and crisp air, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt almost mocking in its beauty. I drove to the lake house in silence, my mind replaying every moment of the past year, every lie John had told, every time he had chosen Vanessa over his dying daughter, every excuse that had seemed. John arrived at the lake house exactly on time, his silver sedan pulling into the gravel driveway with a crunch that announced his presence. I watched from the window as he stepped out, looking relaxed in expensive casual wear, a linen shirt and tailored pants that probably cost more than Lily's last round of medications. He had a tan, evidence of his recent business trips. And his smile was easy, confident, completely unaware of what awaited him inside. I opened the door before he could knock, my expression carefully neutral. "Hey," he said, leaning in for a kiss that I turned away from, letting his lips brush my cheek awkwardly. The confusion that flickered across his face was brief, quickly replaced by his usual charm. "Thanks for reaching out. I've been worried about you." The audacity of that statement nearly broke my composure, but I held firm, gesturing for him to come inside. The lake house was exactly as it had always been, wooden beams and stone fireplace comfortable. Furniture arranged around a coffee table where I had already placed the folder. Though I had covered it with a magazine for now, John settled into his favorite chair, the one by the window with the best view of the lake, and for a moment we sat in uncomfortable silence. "How have you been?" he asked finally, his tone suggesting genuine concern, as if he had any right to ask. How do you think I've been? I replied, my voice flat. I buried our daughter alone last week while you were on vacation. His expression shifted, a micro-expression of guilt quickly smoothed over. It wasn't a vacation, it was work. You know how demanding my job is. I explained this in my text. You explained nothing, I said, standing up and walking to the window, my back to him so he wouldn't see the rage building in my eyes. You sent a text from a luxury resort while I stood at Lily's grave. That's not an explanation, John. That's an insult. I heard him shift in his chair, the leather creaking under his. Wait. I know the timing was bad, but this deal was months in the making. I couldn't just walk away from it. I turned to face him then, my hands clenched at my sides. You walked away from your daughter, you walked away from me, you walked away from every responsibility you had as a husband and father, so don't talk to me about timing. He stood now too, his defensive posture activating. I was trying to provide for us. Someone had to keep the money coming in with all of Lily's medical expenses. The mention of money was my opening. I walked to the coffee table and swept the magazine aside, revealing the folder underneath. Speaking of money, let's talk about where it was really going, I said, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table, bank statements highlighted in yellow, credit card receipts circled in red, printed emails, photos of him with Vanessa, everything laid out like evidence at a crime scene. John's face went pale, his eyes darting from document to document as if hoping they would disappear if he looked away and back quickly enough. What is this? He asked, but his voice had lost its confidence. This, I said, my voice cold and precise, is the truth. Every dollar you stole from our joint account, every lie you told about business trips, every moment you spent with Vanessa while Lily was dying. I picked up a hotel receipt, holding it up. This one is particularly interesting, $5,000 for a weekend suite. The same weekend Lily had her seizure and I couldn't reach you for 6 hours. John opened his mouth but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air, and I felt a savage satisfaction watching him struggle. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. John finally found his voice, though it came out thin and reedy. You went through my private accounts, that's illegal. I laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Illegal? You're going to lecture me about illegal when you've been embezzling from your own company. I pulled out another set of documents, the ones Eleanor had uncovered about the dummy vendors and false invoices. Did you think no one would notice, or did you just not care? His face went from pale to ashen, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the arm of the chair. I don't know what you think you found, but I can explain. Can you? I interrupted. Can you explain this email to Vanessa where you discuss moving abroad, starting fresh, leaving your dying daughter behind without a second thought? I read from the printout, my voice dripping with venom. She won't suspect a thing. By the time she realizes what's happening will be long gone. Those are your words. John, your exact words. He sank back into the chair, his confident facade crumbling completely. I never meant for it to happen this way, it just spiraled out of control. It didn't spiral, I said, stepping closer. You made choices, deliberate, calculated choices. You chose Vanessa over Lily, you chose luxury vacations over your daughter's medication. You chose to embezzle money while I was selling my grandmother's jewelry to pay hospital bills. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't bother wiping them away. They were tears of rage, not sadness. Every single day while Lily was fighting for her life you were planning your escape. How do you live with that? John looked up at me, his eyes glistening with what might have been tears or might have been fear. I couldn't handle it. Watching her suffer was killing me. I needed an escape. You needed an escape, I repeated, my voice rising. What do you think I needed? I was there for every treatment, every setback, every terrifying moment when we thought we might lose her. And I didn't get to escape John. I didn't get to run away to some resort and pretend my daughter wasn't dying. He stood suddenly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, let me explain. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I still love you. We can work through this. Work through this, I said incredulously. You think there's any coming back from what you've done? You abandoned your child, you stole from us, from your company, you built an entire second life with another woman, and now you want to work through it. I walked to the window looking out at the lake, its surface calm and reflective, the complete opposite of the storm raging inside me. I used to think I knew you, I said quietly. I thought we were partners, that we were in this life together, but I was wrong. I never knew you at all. Behind me I heard John move, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice small. I turned back to face him, my expression cold. I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you've done. I've already given all this evidence to the authorities. They're building a case against you for embezzlement, And I've filed for divorce. My attorney has copies of everything. The color drained from his face completely. You can't do this, you'll ruin me. I'm not ruining you, I said calmly. You ruined yourself, I'm just making sure everyone else sees what you really are. John's panic was palpable now. He began pacing, running his hands through his hair. Think about what this will do to my career, to my reputation. John's pacing grew more frantic, his composure completely shattered as the reality of his situation sank in. Please, he begged. There has to be another way, we can work something out. I'll end things with Vanessa, I'll pay back the money, just don't do this. I crossed my arms, my expression unmoved. Why should I show you mercy when you showed none to Lily, when you showed none to me? I reached for my phone, opening the photo gallery to a picture of Lily from 2 weeks before she died, her face pale and drawn but her smile still brave. I held it up for him to see. This is what you missed. This is what you traded for your affair. She kept asking for you, John. Even at the end she wanted her daddy, and I had to lie to her, had to tell her you were working hard for us when really you were off living your fantasy life. His knees seemed to buckle, and he collapsed back into the chair, his face in his hands. The sobs that racked his body were real. I could see that, but they didn't move me. Tears didn't undo what he had done. Regret didn't bring Lily back. I'll never forgive myself, he said through his tears. I know I failed her, I failed both of you. You're right, I said coldly. You did fail us, and now you're going to face the consequences. I gathered up the documents, placing them back in the folder. The police will probably contact you within the next few days. I'd suggest you get a good lawyer. John looked up at me, his eyes red and pleading. What about us? Is there any chance? There is no us. I cut him off. There hasn't been for a long time, maybe there never really was. Maybe I was just too naive to see that you were always the kind of man who would abandon his family when things got hard. I walked toward the door, my hand on the knob. You should leave now, this house belongs to me, it was my father's, and you're no longer welcome here. John stood slowly, his movements unsteady. I do love you, he said quietly. For whatever that's worth. It's worth nothing, I replied. Love isn't just words, John, it's actions, it's showing up, it's being there when things are difficult. You don't know what love is. I opened the door, the cool autumn air rushing in. John walked past me, his shoulders slumped, and paused on the threshold. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sorry doesn't change anything, I said, and closed the door behind him. I stood there for a long moment, listening to his car start and drive away, the sound of gravel under tires fading into the distance. When silence returned, I walked back to the window and watched the sun beginning to set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lily would have loved this view. She had always been drawn to beautiful things, finding joy in sunsets and flowers and the way light danced on water. I felt her absence like a physical ache, a hole in my chest that would never fully heal, but I also felt something else, a sense of purpose, of justice being served. John would face consequences for his actions, the legal system would hold him accountable, his company would learn about his embezzlement, his reputation would be destroyed. Vanessa would discover that the man she thought she knew was capable of abandoning his dying child. And I would rebuild, not for John, not for revenge, but for myself and for Lily's memory. Over the next few weeks, the plan unfolded exactly as Daniel had predicted. John was arrested at his office, the scene witnessed by dozens of colleagues who quickly spread the news throughout his professional network. The company's investigation revealed. The news of John's arrest spread like wildfire through our community. Headlines in the local paper read, "Executive charged with embezzlement," and "Businessman's double life exposed," accompanied by photos of him being led away in handcuffs, his face contorted in shock and fear. I received countless messages, some offering support, others seeking gossip disguised as concern. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the next steps in reclaiming my life. The divorce proceedings moved forward swiftly. Daniel proved to be as competent as Amanda had promised, systematically dismantling any claims John might have had to our shared assets. The evidence of his embezzlement and affair made it impossible for him to argue for anything beyond basic visitation rights, which were moot given Lily's death, and the prenuptial agreement my father had insisted on before our marriage protected the lake house and my inheritance. John's attorney tried to negotiate, suggesting that perhaps we could settle out of court, avoid the publicity, but Daniel and I were united in our refusal. This wasn't about money or assets. It was about accountability, about ensuring that John's actions had real consequences. The trial for the embezzlement charges was set for 6 months out. Giving me time to process everything that had happened, I moved out of the house John and I had shared, the one filled with memories of Lily. into a small apartment overlooking the river. The space was modern and minimalist, the opposite of our cluttered family home, and in that emptiness I found room to breathe. Amanda visited frequently, bringing food and companionship, sitting with me in comfortable silence when words felt inadequate. "How are you really doing?" she asked one evening as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. I considered the question carefully. "I'm surviving," I said finally. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm moving forward." "That's all you can do," Amanda replied, squeezing my hand. "One day at a time." I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a kind woman with gentle eyes who specialized in grief and trauma. Our sessions were difficult, forcing me to confront emotions I had been burying beneath the need for justice. "Anger is a valid response to betrayal," Dr. Mitchell said during one session. "But at some point you'll need to decide if holding on to that anger is serving you or hinting you. Right now it's all I have," I admitted. "It's what gets me out of bed, what gives me purpose." "And when John faces consequences," she pressed, "when the trial is over and he's in prison, what will give you purpose then?" The question haunted me for days. I didn't have an answer. My entire focus had been on bringing John down, on ensuring he paid for his crimes. But what came after that? Who would I be when the anger finally burned itself out? I found myself returning to the lake house, spending weekends there surrounded by memories of my father and of simpler times before John's. Betrayal tainted everything. I began sorting through Lily's belongings, a task I had been avoiding for months. Each toy and book and piece of clothing was a dagger to my heart, but it was also a connection to her, a tangible reminder that she had existed, that her life had mattered. I decided to donate most of her things to the children's hospital where she had received treatment, hoping that other sick children might find comfort in toys that had once brought her joy. But I kept certain items. Her favorite stuffed rabbit, the drawing she had made for me, a lock of her hair. These went into a memory box that I placed in my bedroom, somewhere I could access when the grief became overwhelming. As the trial date approached, Daniel prepared me for what to expect. The trial was everything I had anticipated and more. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and former colleagues of John who wanted to witness his downfall firsthand. I sat in the front row, my spine straight, my expression neutral, determined to watch every moment of his reckoning. John looked diminished in his defendant's chair. The confident executive I had married replaced by a pale shadow of a man who kept his eyes downcast. Unable to meet anyone's gaze, Vanessa was conspicuously absent, having apparently decided that loyalty to a criminal wasn't worth destroying her own reputation. The prosecution laid out their case with devastating precision. Forensic accountants testified about the intricate web of false invoices and dummy vendors John had created. His former colleagues spoke about suspicious transactions they had noticed but dismissed. And Eleanor took the stand to detail her investigation, presenting evidence of his affair alongside the financial crimes. The defense tried to paint John as a man overcome by stress, someone who had made poor decisions while dealing with family tragedy. But Daniel was ready for this. In a powerful closing argument, he showed the timeline, proving that John's embezzlement had begun long before Lily's diagnosis, that this wasn't a man driven to desperate measures by grief, but someone who had been systematically stealing for years. "The defendant wants you to believe he's a victim of circumstances," Daniel said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. "But the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate deceit, of calculated theft, of a man who chose personal gain over familial responsibility, even as his daughter lay dying." When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I walked to the stand with my head held high. I had rehearsed what I would say, but standing there looking at John, the words I had prepared seemed inadequate. My daughter Lily was 8 years old when she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. She fought for 8 months, 8 months of treatments and pain and fear, and through it all she asked for her father. She wanted him there for her birthday, for her hospital stays, for the quiet moments when she was scared. But he wasn't there. He was too busy stealing money and conducting an affair to be present for his dying child. I saw John flinch, saw tears streaming down his face, but I continued. I stood alone at her funeral. I held her hand as she took her last breath. I watched her coffin being lowered into the ground, and through all of it I wondered how a father could choose anything over his child, how a husband could betray his family so completely. I turned to address the jury directly. "The financial crimes John committed are serious, but what he stole from Lily, from me, goes beyond money. He stole time, presence, love. He stole my daughter's chance to have her father with her at the end, and that is something no sentence can ever truly rectify. The courtroom was silent as I stepped down. Even the judge looked moved. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, I felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of closure. John was sentenced to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. He was also ordered to pay restitution to his company and to me, though the money meant nothing compared to what had been lost. As the guards led him away, John looked back at me one last time, his expression a mixture of regret and resignation. I held his gaze. The weeks following the trial passed in a strange blur, as if I were moving through water, everything muted and distant. The media attention gradually faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies, and I found myself facing the question Dr. Mitchell had posed months earlier. What came next? Who was I beyond the grieving mother and betrayed wife? I threw myself into creating something positive from the ashes of my pain. Using the restitution money John had been ordered to pay, I established the Lily Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families with children facing terminal illnesses. The foundation would provide financial assistance for medical bills, emotional support through counseling services, and practical help with daily tasks that became overwhelming during crisis. Amanda joined me as co-director, bringing her organizational skills and unwavering support. Together we assembled a board of directors, recruited volunteers, and began reaching out to hospitals and medical centers. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months we had helped 15 families. Within 6 months that number had doubled. Each family we assisted felt like a small tribute to Lily, a way of ensuring her suffering had meaning beyond grief. I began speaking at fundraisers and community events, sharing Lily's story and the foundation's mission. Public speaking terrified me at first, but I discovered a voice I didn't know I possessed. People were moved by our message, donations poured in, and the foundation grew beyond anything I had imagined. One evening I received a letter from a mother named Grace whose son had been diagnosed with the same cancer that took Lily. Our foundation had helped cover his treatment costs, and he was now in remission. "Your daughter's legacy saved my son's life," Grace wrote. "I will never forget what you and the Lily Foundation did for our family." I read the letter sitting at my kitchen table, tears streaming down my face, but these were different tears, not of grief or rage, but of something approaching peace. Lily's death had broken something in me that would never fully heal. But from those broken pieces I was building something new, something that honored her memory and helped others. I returned to the lake house on the anniversary of Lily's death, bringing flowers and her favorite chocolate chip cookies. I sat by the water's edge, the same water I had watched countless sunsets over, and I talked to her, told her about the foundation, about the families we had helped, about how I was trying to turn tragedy into something meaningful. "I miss you every day," I said aloud, my voice carrying over the still water. "I wish you were here, wish I could hear your laugh one more time, but I'm trying to honor your memory, trying to make sure your life mattered." A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and for a moment I felt Lily's presence so strongly it took my breath away. The following year brought more growth. The foundation expanded to 3 states.